Board of Supervisors to order, please. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. Following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 4th Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, March 19th, 2024, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I would like to request everyone put their phones on silent and or vibrate as to not be an interruption in the meeting, and thank you for your compliance. And we'll proceed to roll call, and I ask everyone please sign in. And I thank you. I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have here this evening, and even in some cases our special guests. So I thank you for your interest in Marathon County government, and we will proceed to item number B, education presentation and or reports. Standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any standing committee chairs or designees, any reports to the board? Okay, we will move on to the consent agenda. Items C8 through items C12B. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Seefeld, a second by Supervisor Ritter. Supervisor Sandelsky, please.
Yeah, I've just got something to bring up on administrator's work plan. I'd like to have it added with the about. In January, we had a presentation from the District Attorney Winston about the drug courts and all the issues they're having with the like the drug dealers and stuff. From my understanding of the way it's working, it needs some work on the drug court part of it. So I'd like to see if that could get added to the administrative work plan and looked into too, because it seems like it's kind of a failing situation right now. Thank you.
That you'd have to pull the administrator's work plan, and it would have to be an amendment to the administrator's work plan. So are you requesting that that item be pulled?
Sure, we could get yeah.
Okay, so we are having items C8 through items C12A. Any further discussion on those items? Item C12B is pulled and is separate. Any further discussion? Okay, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. The motion is carried, but is not unanimous. Moving on to item now, 12B, adopt the 2024 Administrator's Work Plan. And I need the clerk to, okay, so I just need a motion by Supervisor Lamont, second by Supervisor Van Cray. Any discussion? Supervisor Sandelsky.
So I'd like to make a motion to add that amendment to add the drug court as part of the administrator's work plan.
Is there a second? In just a second, the clerk will have to present and put into opens meetings the motion in a second. Okay. Motion by Supervisor Sandalski and second by Supervisor Shafinsky. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Just for what purpose? What are we looking to do from a clarification? Because just putting it in there, are we looking to enhance, expand?
Supervisor Sandalski.
Thank you. Well, just to get more research into what's going on with it, because we had a long presentation back in January about from both District Attorney Wenzel and FBI agent. They talked about in depth about the drug court and some of the failures and stuff that are happening with it. So I'd like to see if we could go through it and look and see if we can do anything to make it better, better plan.
Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just, I know everyone can see it within the work plan, but how I would interpret the motion is under under the budget-related projects, there's already a report that I referenced within the budget document that I would report to public safety on the utilization relative to alcohol treatment court, which is the other treatment court that we currently have operating besides drug court, I should say, including alternative proposals if appropriate. I can include within that item a report to public safety on some of the key performance indicators from drug court. Okay, so, thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Zhang, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would want the possibility of adding this to the administrator's work plan to be referred back to the the Public Safety Committee. I guess either that would hear from the Public Safety Committee as to why, whether this has been discussed about adding to the administrator's plan at all, just kind of giving some context as well to prior to voting to this.
Okay, we got Supervisor Marash. We'll have Supervisor Boots in a second with Chair of Public Safety. Supervisor Marash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Supervisor Zhang's question, yes, in public safety, we did discuss this at length, and we talked about having the budget more transparent as far as how much is spent on each one of these courts and the diversion program, et cetera, and using more of our dashboards to show the performance indicators. So this is not a new topic. Thank you.
Supervisor Boots, please.
Yeah, I would say ditto to what Supervisor Marash said. And if we wanted to, I guess I would ask that Supervisor Sandalski would just on 2D, maybe alcohol and other treatment courts, because he is bringing us back a report anyway. So just maybe to put that in there so that it's noted in his work plan.
Okay, any other discussion? I have Corp Counsel discuss
I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page with what the amendment is, including Supervisor Sadelsky, to make sure I'm capturing it right. So this would be to amend the administrator's work plan specifically under 2D to add alcohol and other treatment courts. So that would require a report to public safety on the utilization relative to alcohol and other treatment courts, including alternative proposals if appropriate. Is that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, Vice Chair McEwen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Corp Counsel answered my question. I wasn't exactly sure what was going to be added, so thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. Moving on to, okay, that was the amendment. So now the adoption of the 2024 Administrator's Work Plan as amended. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, we will proceed to vote on the motion as amended. Supervisor Hart, can you vote?
Mine's connecting also. Yes.
And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Moving on to Extension Education Economic Development Committee, item D13, a consideration of a request for Marathon County, Wisconsin to approve the Public Finance Authority as conduit issuer for not to exceed 25 million exempt facility revenue bonds to benefit Buckhorn RNG LLC project. Resolution 5-24. Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and seconded by Supervisor Sherfinsky. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. Moving on to item E, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee. Item E14, establish salaries for the county clerk, treasurer, and register of deeds, elected department heads for the upcoming term of office. Resolution 7-24. Motion by Supervisor Robinson and seconded by Supervisor Covelli. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want you to remember the words responsibility, accountability, and exposure. Those were the three terms when I talked to Molly Etzitz, the Human Resources Director, that she gave as the basis for our classification system. And we're talking about today setting the salaries for 3 elected officials who have administrative responsibilities similar to most other department heads in the county. The difference is the Constitution says that they're elected. I think if you asked many people, myself and others in administration, I think we would like to see those appointed versus elected, but we need to change the Constitution to do so because they're not partisan political positions, but rather they work for the best interests of the county. So the question tonight is, how do we compensate them? So in 2012, we commissioned the Fox Lawson to do a study, and they came back with classifications for the positions, and the clerk had a higher classification than did the treasurer, and treasurer was one step ahead of the register of deeds. In 2022, we approved the McGrath study where we looked at compensation while these positions weren't included in that study. That study was the basis for Molly Etz's the evaluation of the positions and putting them in our internal classification system based upon responsibility, accountability, and exposure to the county. We are trying to set the salaries. We ought to be looking at them and how they relate to other employees within the county system. How do they relate to the Department of Emergency Management? How do they relate to some of the other departments? And we look at the issue of what's the scope, how many people, what's the magnitude, what's the exposure. And I think given the complexities of the elections these days and all the attention paid to them, I think, and in the expanded responsibilities that we've bestowed upon that position, I think we can all feel comfortable, at least I feel comfortable paying that position more. And we've had some changes in some of the responsibilities in some of the other departments, but generally they're The proposal before us today is to treat the two others, registered deeds and treasurer, in a similar manner, which happens in many other counties. I would encourage you to rely upon the expertise of our professional staff who have evaluated this. They've looked at past pay compensation studies. They've tried to put in how they fit into our system. And you can look to our neighboring counties. You can look to other counties, but you'll find that we have more parcels, or I don't think any county has more parcels than we do. We have a large budget compared to our surrounding counties, but we're trying to look at it in the context of how do they fit internally within our class compensation for our employees. You don't run for Portage County Clerk when you live in Marathon County, and you don't run for Marathon County Clerk if you live in Portage County. So we're really looking at how do we compare with our own local market. And you can argue we can look at national firms. Well, I would have loved it. I worked for the DNR. If I had worked in the same position in Minnesota, they would have paid me 35% more. If I worked in Chicago and EPA, they would have paid me 50% more. I worked here. That's what's important. So I would encourage you to rely upon the expertise of our Human Resources Department, who consulted with our consultant who developed our class compensation study and set the salaries. We argued over this 4 years ago, and because COVID hit, we said, well, people are going to lose their jobs. We can't give them a pay raise. So they got lump sum increases in 2017 through 21, and they got no increase since then. That's not fair. Let's not argue over the semantics. Let's rely on the professional judgment of our HR department, who we empower to set the classifications and recommendations for us to set these salaries.
Supervisor Covelli, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the Human Resources Finance Committee for the job that they did. I think they did a commendable job. I think the Human Resources Department also did a fine job. I think and my background, as I said on Thursday, is I do have employees that I do annual compensation for, and I have to look at that every year when I do that. I look at it almost similar to the way that our Human Resources Department did and the HFRC committee did. So I think that, I think when I looked at it, I looked at the comparables. I looked at the 3 counties that we talked about. I looked at 72 counties. I also looked nationally at the national levels and, all the counties involved at the national side of things. So I'd like to make a motion that actually increases it a little bit more than the pretty much 9 or 9.6%. So I'd like to make a motion to amend R-7-24.
And just to be clear, Supervisor Covelli, are you offering your proposed substitute amendment at this time?
Yes.
And that is in the packet. It's after the original R-724. Looks like it's page 88 of your packet.
Okay, there's a motion to provide a substitute amendment. Is there a second to that substitute, or to the amendment to a substitute amendment? Seconded by Supervisor Shafinsky. Any further discussion? Supervisor Sandulski.
Can you just clarify that? So did you say 9% or 9.6 or what? Is that for all of them, or can you just clarify it a little bit?
Supervisor Langenhan will be next. Supervisor Langenhan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with respect, I would hope we have a little bit more discussion because I'd like a second to review this resolution. I did not have a chance to look at my packet before I came to the meeting this evening, so I would ask for a little bit of time.
All right. Supervisor Covelli, if you want to, you're next to speak. If you want to address the proposed amendment and the substitute resolution and what it's actually saying in comparison to the original resolution?
Sure, and it's pretty close. What I did was I took the current salaries and looking at the current salary totals and going to the 25 totals in the original resolution, they were about 6% increase overall. And I looked at comparables. I looked at a lot of things that have to do with the job descriptions. And what I found was, the way I do it in the private sector, I typically go off of merit and then comparables. For these positions, and there are actually 2 more positions that we should look at in the future, we can't use merit increase because anybody could get elected to this position and start out at these salaries. So what I did, because they haven't seen an increase in 8 years, a real increase in 8 years, I wanted to make sure that we compensated each position equitably to make sure that they see a nice increase over the last 8 years. And it really came out to about little under 2% increase versus, I believe, 1.3% with the original resolution. So it actually, I gave them a little bit better bump and made it more equitable across all 3 positions, which I think, compared to our state averages, we're actually doing pretty well. I think we're in the top 10. And nationally, when I look nationally, there's a lot of states that the clerk, treasurer, and register of deeds make $30,000 or $40,000 for a county level. That's not a lot. But I did find that across the nation, there are a lot of those positions that make over $100,000. So what do, right? So one of the things that my goal was to, kind of not kick the can down the road and try to have the argument of, hey, this is a challenge. That was one of the words that I've heard at a lot of meetings. It's a challenge, right, to establish these salaries. I wanted to eliminate that and figure out a process that we could have in place to not make it a challenge for future boards, that they could set that salary, and based off of this information that I have here, instead of going back to local comparables, because you really can't compare locally at the municipality level because they have different responsibilities, versus a population of 136,000 people versus a municipality population. So I really kind of took a neutral approach at looking at that and taking out, the things that I thought should be taking out, because I do have some experience at doing this. So I guess that, giving them that little bit extra bump and making it more equitable between all 3 positions, that was my goal. So thank you.
Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I looked at the data as well, and I looked at this more from a standpoint of how do you compare positions, because, because you can make a lot of discussion points both ways. Do you compare municipalities? Do you compare to the private sector? And before I go on any further, I'd like to say that I'd like to thank the various committees and staff work. A lot of work was done that's well done, provides a good foundation for our discussions, but it's only part of the picture. So the other part of the picture, and an equally valid way of looking at this, is we have very comparable positions. We have 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin. Each one of them has a county clerk, treasurer, and register of deeds. As Supervisor Robertson said, it's in the Constitution. So that provides, and you can then go off of that and say, well, but look at the size of Milwaukee County, look at the size of Washington County, Marathon, so on and so on. But we have 72 data points to look at, and I did. So the statewide average for county clerk is $77,585. This would be in your packet, but that was denied. Treasurer, statewide average is $74,671. So we're a little bit low on that. We're quite high for county clerk. The Register of Deeds, statewide average, $74,614, almost identical to treasurer. Ours is $68,772. So the Register of Deeds lags behind in Marathon County. So that's the statewide averages. If you look, another way of looking at this is, let's look at central Wisconsin, Marathon County, and our surrounding counties of Clark, Langlade, Lincoln, Portage, Taylor, Shawano, Wood. If you look at that, the averages come out to be about 73,000, 71,800 for treasurer, and 72,700 for Register of Deeds, and 73,500 for county clerk. So again, you know, the clerk is considerably higher than our comparisons, and on the other two positions, they treat them equally. We're not treating them at the same level. And the same can be said if you compare central Wisconsin with Marathon and Washington County, because we always seem to talk about Washington County. I think we sometimes want to move ourselves downstate. So with that in mind, what I look at is Lincoln, Langlade, Portage, Taylor, Shawano, Wood, and Washington all treat the treasurer and Register of Deeds the same. They all have the same salaries internal to each county. So the motion that I would like to make a motion to amend Supervisor Covelli's motion to that we actually treat the treasurer's salary and Register of Deeds salary match the county clerk salary.
I'm going to need some clarity on the actual numbers that you're proposing in the amendment.
Okay, can you bring up, let me, I can get that to you here. So, okay, so if I look at Supervisor Covelli's proposed amendment, he would bring in 2025, he proposed to bring the clerk to 93,733. The treasurer and Register of Deeds, he had set at 76,511. My amendment would have the treasurer and Register of Deeds match at 93,733 starting in 2025, so that going forward, all three of those positions are treated equally. And the rationale is that every other county in the state appears to do that. So that's a different way of looking at it than what we had internally, but there's multiple ways of looking at it, and I think that's one that deserves our attention.
Corp Counsel would like some clarity.
Just if I could clarify, Supervisor Scherfinski, in Supervisor Covelli's proposed amendment, the clerk's 2025 salary would be $90,930. Is that what your proposal would have the treasurer and Register of Deeds at, and then following the same 3% increase over the next 3 years?
Okay, I have a different set of numbers in front of me.
The 83,000.
Current is 83,422.
Correct.
The number that I have, the table that I have in front of me.
You're looking at the original resolution. I think the the substitute resolution from Supervisor Covelli is 90,930 for the clerk, and 83,351 for the treasurer, and 83,351 for the Register of Deeds.
Okay, so I was reading the wrong table. So my motion would be to amend that all three salaries match Supervisor Covelli's intended salary for the clerk of courts, and that treasurer and Register of Deeds match that.
You mean the clerk and not the clerk of courts? You said the
I'm
clerk of
sorry,
courts.
county clerk.
Okay, there's a motion, amendment to the amendment to offer the clerk's treasurer starting salary in 2025 at $90,930 and the treasurer and the register of deeds the same number. Is there a second? Just a second, the clerk needs to put into is there a second to that motion? Is there a second to that motion? Seeing no second to that motion dies, and we're back to the amendment as originally offered, as you see in front of you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So I do have, the clerk has kept track of the order of people's requests to speak. And so we have next Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I want to also thank the HR Finance Committee and the Human Resources Department and Administrator Leonard for the work they had done. I also want to thank Supervisor Cavelli. I think that he has put forth a good proposal. It reflects the counties around us. It reflects the, it keeps fairly consistent between the clerk and the treasurer register of deeds as what was before, so it doesn't widen it as the initial proposal did. It's narrowed a little bit, but not much. So I intend to vote for the amendment by Supervisor Cavelli. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'd like to see some more discussion from the board on this, because in my review here between the original and the proposed amendment, in the original for 2025, the increases go as follows for the clerk, treasurer, and register of deeds respectively. So for the clerk, 12.4%, treasurer, 4.3%, register of deeds, 11.3%, with a total fiscal impact on page 87 of $130,149. For the amendment resolution, the clerk would be 7%, the treasurer would be 10%, and the register of deeds would be 21%. With the total fiscal impact on page 88 being $175,591. So doing some quick math here, the amendment would reduce the increase for the clerk by 5.4%. For the treasurer, would increase by 5.7%. And for the register of deeds, it would increase 10.7%, which these are wildly different numbers compared to the original, and also a $45,000 increase in the fiscal impact between the original to the amendment. And just for the sake of discussion this evening, I agree with everybody that said that the statutory responsibilities, or more accurately, the constitutional responsibilities, do remain the same for all these constitutional offices throughout the state. I don't think anybody disputes that. The one thing that I would dispute is the level of impact that the demographics of each county has on each of those constitutional offices. For example, Marathon County, we got roughly 140,000 people, right? We're the largest county in landmass in the entire state. Understandably, there are going to be certain challenges that are going to be, imposed on certain offices here because of those challenges. For example, I'm not going to pick Washington County. I won't, I swear. I'll pick Forest County, right? Forest County's got about 4,000 people that live there, okay? Same constitutional responsibilities between those offices and our offices, but the demands placed on those jobs are wildly different. You could expand that analysis to include, staffing. I think the word that was used was exposure earlier. The other thing I would add is that nationwide, I think I'm willing to speculate that the challenges of a Wisconsin clerk are probably going to be wildly different than a South Dakota clerk, right? Just because of the nature of Wisconsin compared to a less populous state. I have some doubts with this amendment. I think if anything, it would almost need to be referred back to HR Finance for more discussion at this point, because I'm very concerned about those changes and the increases between the two amendments, and then also the $45,000 increase in the fiscal impact. And I'll end this comment by saying, for some of you that have been around for a while, I got to see Jim Schaefer this past weekend. And I remember my first term on the county board, I sat next to him and he was kind of a mentor for me. And he said, Long and Han, the only thing you got to pay attention to is on the second page of a lot of these amendments what the fiscal impact says. For those of you who know Jim, you'd understand that. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Marash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was to have the resolution put up on the screen, so you did that. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to responsibility, accountability, and exposure. Responsibility, accountability, and exposure. So we're being asked tonight to set the salaries, which we have to do at this meeting. So we can't send it back to committee unless you're willing to have another meeting this month to set those salaries before they start with their nomination papers. We've got to act tonight. I want to pick up on the thought of Supervisor Lonenhan. Not all counties are the same. We're 10th in population. Wood County is 22nd. Portage is 23rd. You start dropping dramatically when you start going to the other counties after that. We have more towns than the others, therefore more clerks. We have more parcels than they have. It's very difficult to do those comparisons. Property listing services are handled in different departments and handled differently in other counties. If you've seen one county, you've seen one county. And I think what we're trying to do with this recommendation is to look at those class compensation studies. Every one of them deserves an increase in pay. We've not treated them well in the past. And if I had my druthers, we'd give them more. But I think we want to be consistent with our own internal processes in reviewing responsibility, accountability, and exposure. That ought to drive us for our internal comparisons for these elected positions and how they fit in with the others. So I encourage you to not approve the amendment and go approve the original motion.
Supervisor Crivelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the comments. The one thing that I'm looking at doing is not just, seeing what we're doing today or historically. What I'm looking at is how do we rectify the situation where it is a challenge every 4 years that we have to go through this and make that less of a challenge. So the original amendment or the original resolution, the amortization over the last 8 years was 1.3% increase. That's the original resolution. My resolution is closer to 2% increase over the last 8 years, which is more in line with the private sector increases over the last 8 years versus, what we're looking at with the original resolution. So, my resolution actually, the $175,591 fiscal impact, if you amortize that over the last 8 years, it's actually quite low. So, to say that my resolution should not be passed really, you have to dig deeper than that. You have to look at the last 8 years and what was passed and what wasn't passed 4 years ago, and what do these positions deserve, right? So that's what I was looking at trying to do, is make that less of a challenge for future boards. Future boards could say, you know, in 4 years, they could say, we're going to increase all 3 of those salaries by 5%. Or whatever they decide. It's easy, right? That's the easy way to do it, instead of trying to figure out, okay, this position does this position does this, what increase do they deserve? Instead, we can look at a straight across the board percentage increase for all 3, which will keep those numbers in line with the national averages or the local averages, if you look. So, you know, you have to, I did a lot of research for this. And I found the more data points that you have, the better information you get. So to look at just a couple of counties in Wisconsin, you don't get a lot of data points. You get more data points the further out you go, and better averages the further out you go. So that was my intent. So I would encourage a yes vote on this. Because it actually increases the total amount that we're awarding these positions if it passes, versus the original resolution. Thank you.
Supervisor Van Cray, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like others have mentioned, I do appreciate the work that Supervisor Covelli has put into this. I can't believe you have the time to do national comparisons for salaries, so thank you. However, I would like to echo Supervisor Robinson that we have HR professionals that are presenting what would be the appropriate classifications for these positions. I think it's important to recognize that the heavy workload the clerk has, the public scrutiny that position is under, and honestly the safety concerns that a clerk has. If you've ever worked an election, you probably can understand how important these types of jobs are, puts it at a different classification than these other positions. These are jobs that are different levels of responsibility, and that should be reflected like our HR professional has given to us. Based on the comments made at our last meeting, my perception of this situation is that the treasurer is friendly with some members of this body and that they are advocating for her to get a larger raise, which in my opinion is inappropriate. I think we should be going with what our HR director has presented to us. And lastly, this just came to me earlier. I think it's worth noting that members of this body who have advocated for cuts, voted against grants, lambasted the administrator and members of this body for an increase in an annual budget would make an amendment to increase the fiscal impact of this resolution. So just wanted to make note of that. Thank you.
Supervisor Marash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My opinion is I'm fine with the clerk and the initial resolution for her salary. She has a lot of extenuating circumstances with her position. What I'm most concerned with is for the treasurer, and to be clear, I don't know her on a personal level. I don't know her at all, so it has nothing to do with that. But just the initial increase discrepancy, the 4.3% and the 11.3% for the Register of Deeds, and maybe it's been clarified before, but if you could clarify it one more time for me, because it feels, and I don't use that word lightly, I don't use the word feel, but it does feel a little bit insulting to me when I look at that. So if you could explain that, thanks.
Supervisor Robinson?
I'll try. I don't know that I'll get it right, but I'll try. And I want to take you back in time. When when Fox Lawton came in, they identified at that time that highway workers were overpaid. And as a result, we redlined them to bring them into line. And what we found out 2 years ago is that we couldn't hire highway workers. So we did some adjustments with McGrath. But we did it understanding what the dynamics were of their relative value to the class compensation study, looking at market conditions and others. We relied on our HR department, who consulted with McGrath, who did the class compensation study that we adopted in 2022 for the placement of those positions. Responsibilities tie into our classification system. And in the past, we've treated different classes, job titles differently on how they fit into that class comp study for our own internal consistency of responsibility, accountability, and exposure. That's why there are differences. And we can't look back and correct what's happened since 2017 or it didn't happen in 2020. What we're doing now is trying to establish the salary based upon responsibility, accountability, and exposure. And there are titles and positions that will change in value over time due to market conditions. I think this is the HR department's recommendation based upon what they've looked at, who they've talked to, looked at comparables, internal, external, and their recommendation to us.
That's his third time. Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that I could have said it much better. I think to your point, Supervisor Marash, overcoming how something might feel is certainly, it's very human of all of you on the board. And the process that we go through, and Molly is here if anybody has more specific questions or if she thinks she can illuminate this issue a bit more, but it was driven by those three things that Supervisor Robinson referenced, and I think I made reference to this at the last meeting. The recommendation is very much in line with what had been kind of that historical grading of those positions. The marginal change between Register and Deeds and Treasurer, I made reference to that at the last meeting. There were some changes in those positions, again, not overly substantial. The Treasurer's position in previous grading, so if you go back to 2016, 2017, had 2 additional positions in it and some additional work relative to the assessments. Those things changed on the margin. The responsibilities for supervision were shifted to the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department. That department, of course, as everyone I think is rightfully recognizing, does very important work. But there is that marginal change there. So now the department has a total of the treasurer and 2 additional staff. The Register of Deeds has the Register of Deeds and 3 additional staff. So in terms of supervision, there were some changes on the margin. The thing that, going back to what Supervisor Robinson referenced and Supervisor Van Cree, the thing that in our analysis, and as was confirmed by Molly speaking with our consultant, is really the thing that separates those is that area of elections. And I think we can all appreciate, I certainly appreciate all the work that you do as elected officials. The increased scrutiny with respect to elections, they are vitally important to our republic, and that is even more so in the public eye. That is the underlying piece that, should you choose to base the salary determination based on duties and internal comparison, that's the thing that separates them. But as also was pointed out, there are other ways of doing that. There are other counties that take a different perspective. I don't know, Molly, is there anything that I missed? She's given me the thumbs up. Take note, that's rare. So thank you.
Vice Chair McKeon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very good discussion. I appreciate all the information and time that was put into the different data that was gathered. I guess I just want to ditto what Supervisor Van Cree and Robinson had brought up. There has been over the years more responsibilities given to the clerk's office. Same thing with the sheriff's department, with the courthouse security. The clerk's office is not 8 to 4 or 4:30. They have elections. They have to staff 2 county board meetings, plus 6 standing committee meetings. We put a lot more responsibility, and when I say we, it's the county board, into what we require from the clerk's office. I understand the concerns with the difference in as far as percentages. However, I think we have to respect the information that we received from the company that we hired and used before to evaluate the salaries of our elected officials and department heads, and the HR, finance, and HR department for what the work they put into this. And I'm going to be supporting the first resolution, the original one, because I think I don't want to be second guessing the staff that we hired to do these evaluations. If so, I don't think we should be wasting our money on the information that we're receiving from them. So thank you very much.
Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to address Supervisor Van Cray's comments. I have absolutely no personal relationship or knowledge with the county clerk, the treasurer, or register of deeds. I'm looking at these as positions and also as people who are holding these positions and trying to do what makes sense for them. Quite frankly, I'm insulted by the implication and the insinuation that it was included with that remark. So looking at this, I absolutely support Supervisor Covelli's amendment. I would have gone a bit farther because I think that we're talking about this, and I think something else that we need to look at and we need to be mindful of is, first of all, we're all too quick to go out and hire out consultants. Consultant oftentimes is somebody that came 100 miles to ask you what time it is. We can do our own work internally, but and I think the HR department did fine work. I think that's one way of looking at things internally. I think there's questions as to whether or not you want to compare it to local municipalities. I think from a constitutional and statewide perspective, I think it makes sense to look at it that way. That's another way of looking at it. I think Supervisor Covelli's amendment does put those things on a little bit more even keel with respect to internally the different positions and also throughout the state. I mean, we have 72 counties and practically everybody else does things differently, and we'd like to think that we're somehow special. We're not as special as we'd like to think. So I'd look at that. I think Supervisor Covelli's position and amendment gives us a good way of making this move forward and keeping those positions from getting out of track as we look down the road. And I will be supporting that. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhahn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd just like to encourage my colleagues, let's maintain decorum here.
Exactly.
Calmer heads shall prevail, right? Everybody should just take a second to breathe. So I just want to say that before I get to my points here. I want to go back to the earlier point that I made, and I want to apologize. My math was incorrect on one point. So I was reviewing the percentage increases for 2025 between the original and the amendment. So I'm going to go through these again because I had to double check my math. So for the clerk, it's a decrease in 5.4%. For the treasurer, it's an increase of 5.7%. And for the register of deeds, it's an increase by 9.7%. I think I might have said 10.7%. I apologize. Just wanted to clear that up. To summarize my points, I like the idea of compensation based on merit. I think the experts do that. I would also like to thank Supervisor Covelli for his work on this. That being said, though, like I said, I think the consultants have looked at the finer points of this. They've looked at the merit of each of these positions. I'm going to go with them. I'd urge you all not to support the amendment. I urge you all to support the original resolution. Thank you.
Supervisor Boots, next, please.
Thank you. So I'm doing something that I wasn't going to do. I feel we have two pretty much sides of this one right now. I'd like to make an amendment. So the amendment I'd like to have is on page 86. The treasurer would increase to 10%, which Supervisor Cavelli did, and the rest would stay the same on the original document.
Do you have the actual number? So the number would be,
So I'd want the number to stay what Supervisor Cavelli had down on the bottom as far as the 10%. The only thing that would change would be the treasurer line up on the first, so it falls more in line of the 10, 11, and 12%. I'm sorry, the treasurer would be the 10%. The clerk would say the same, 12.4. Register of deed would say the same, 11.3.
so you're looking at the original.
Looking at the original one.
So that motion would be out of order at this point because it's an amendment to another amendment.
Correct. I apologize.
So
You're right.
If that is.
I messed up.
So
I've only been doing this 10 years. I really didn't know what was going on.
I stand corrected. The Corp Counsel says the amendment would be in order. So you're going back to the original motion with the original resolution and changing exclusively the treasurer, increasing the treasurer from 4.3% increase to a 10% increase, and leaving the Register of Deeds at 11.3% increase and the clerk at a 12.4% increase. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So what's the number?
If it's out of order, I can wait too. That's fine.
So, as stated, I think it would be out of order because you're going back to the original motion.
So I can state it on the other one, which is fine. So I would state that the one that was proposed by Supervisor Cavelli put the numbers from the original, the first two. So change the 7 and the 21% to the 12.4 and 11.3 respectively. That would be in order, I would assume.
That, I believe, would be in order because you're amending the amendment.
Man, I knew I could do it.
To
That's
return. Yes, I think that's in order.
So if I understand the amendment correctly, the starting salary for the clerk would be $93,733. The treasurer would be $80,686, which is 10% increase over the current salary, and the Register of Deeds would remain at $76,511. Is that correct?
Yes. Correct.
Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Supervisor Cavelli. Any discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Any discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Okay, so we're going back and substituting the original resolution, original numbers, 93,733 starting for 2025 for the clerk, 80,686 or 10% increase over the 73,351 for the treasurer, 11.3% increase or 76,511, all starting salaries for, again, the clerk at 93,733, treasurer at 76,511, and register of, 80,686 for the treasurer, and register of deeds at 76,511. Supervisor Lamont, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask Supervisor Boots what his rationale is to increase that? just to make it more level across the board?
Yeah, the rationale was we're at 12.4, 11.3, and we were talking 2% raises, which Supervisor Cravelli is correct. You're talking 2 to 3% in the private sector. That's really all I did.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to stay away from, this is going to sound funny because of the role that we're all in, but I want to stay away from the politics of this. And it kind of feels like we're involved in politics right now with setting compensation for these offices. I understand where Supervisor Boots is coming from, but this is starting to seem political. I can't support this.
Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I just wanted to clarify in response to one of the earlier comments, I won't say names. I want to clarify that I do not have a personal relationship or a friendship with any of the three office holders. Thank you.
Supervisor Van Cray, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you clarify those numbers one more time? Because one of them didn't seem correct to me, so maybe I'm misunderstanding.
So I took the original resolution, which called for a 93,733 for the clerk. 10% of 73,351 is $7,335. Added the 7,335 to the 73,351, coming up with 80,686 for the treasurer, and the Register of Deeds at 76,511. Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Supervisor Straub, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What would the total fiscal impact statement read after that amendment?
The Corp Council's working on that number for you.
Math is not my strong suit. You're going to have to wait a little bit longer. I went to law school.
So if I have the numbers correct, I'll repeat them. The current salary totals $225,000 for the three positions, $225,545. The new total with the new proposals, $250,730. So a difference of $25,000. $25,385 over the current salary. Again, that's a 2017 number. Now, that's just 1 year's difference And the Corp Council's getting you the 4 years worth of difference. The fiscal impact for the 3 years is what?
The fiscal impact for the entire 4-year term would be $147,616.85.
And just to be clear, that does not include the additional benefits, the additional Social Security that the employer must pay, the additional retirement, and the others. So that would add to, that is just the dollar salary change on the 4 years. Any further discussion? Supervisor Krause, please.
Yes, I'd like to say that I support the original plan that was given by HR. The reason being that this is not private for-profit business. It's government. People are in it for service. They're not in it to make a lot of money. And everybody is hurting today. I don't think we should add more expenses to our budget. Thank you.
Any further discussion? So is everybody clear what the motion would be? That we'd be voting on the clerk's salary for starting in 2025 will be $93,733. This is the motion. And the treasurer's salary will be $80,686. The Register of Deeds salary will be $76,511. Each of the subsequent years will have a 3% increase for each of those positions. 2026, the clerk going up, 2027, the clerk going up by 3%. In 2028, the clerk going up by 3%, as true with the treasurer for those same 3-year positions. Register of Deeds also going up 3%, 3%, 3%. Is everybody clear? All right, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is defeated. Now we're back to the amendment as offered by Supervisor Curvelli. Any further discussion on that amendment? Is everybody clear what that motion and vote would be? Can you bring that one up? That would set salaries at the clerk for $90,930 for 2025. It would increase the treasurer to $83,353. That's not a 10% increase. That's a bigger percentage of increase than 10%. It's a $10,000 increase. In the Register of Deeds would be $83,351 also. Is everybody clear? Supervisor Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak against the amendment and would be voting in favor of the original proposal. We need to trust the process. Thank you.
Supervisor Curvelli, you've already spoken 3 times on the amendment. Oh, excuse me, this is your 3rd time. I'm sorry. Clerk, correct me.
I can go. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask that you correct the numbers in my amendment. To the 10%, 21%, which would be the 80,000 number.
80,686 would be a 10% increase
Yes.
from the 73,351.
Yes.
Okay, so you want. I think the substitute amendment is on the table as presented. I need an amendment to the amendment again.
Yeah.
I would need an amendment to the amendment to change that to the 80,686. I'm sorry, but I think it's been on the table as presented as a substitute amendment, and as presented, it's at the.
Point of order, wouldn't that be a clerical error because the 10%'s on there? Isn't that a math error?
I'll let Corp Counsel.
I think the clerical error is the 10%. I mean, I think the salaries are substantive and pretty vital to the resolution. So if you're changing that numerical dollar amount, I think it does need an amendment to the amendment. If we were just changing the percentage to reflect the difference between the initial salary and what's currently in that resolution, the 83,351, I think that would be clerical.
Thank you. And I wouldn't be opposed if anybody wanted to make an amendment to the clerk's increase too.
Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask that we have a recite back the number that was intended, please. The 80,000, what was the intended number that we're debating? Which number was the clerical error?
Well, what Corp Counsel's ruling is the clerical error is the percentage, and that the salary as presented on the resolution is the appropriate number. So the percentage that you come up with as far as an increase.
Okay, that's not the question that I was asking. Okay. We were talking about a 80,000 something number, but I didn't get a chance to write that down.
So 10% of a 10% increase over 73,351 is 80,686.
Okay, thank you.
And the current resolution, instead of the initial increase, actually is 13.63% versus 10%.
So then I would like to offer the amendment that the treasurer and register of deeds salary would go to 80,686 as intended. I would also like to ask that should we move forward, that we then have a a final accounting of the fiscal impact, so we know what we're actually looking at.
Before we go through the work of getting a fiscal impact, I'll call for a second first. Is there a second? Just a second, the clerk needs to put in the motion. Okay, now is there a second to the Supervisor Sierpinski's motion? And that is to move the treasurer to $80,686 and the Register of Deeds to $80,686. We would also have to correct the initial rate increase, and that the 10% for the treasurer would be now correct, but the Register of Deeds percentage increase would now be 17.3%. Again, is there a second to that motion? Okay, Supervisor Crivelli is seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to confirm what's being presented in front of us. So we're on page 88, correct? We're looking at the amendment, correct?
Correct.
Okay, the amendment that was just proposed addresses the percentage increases for the treasurer and the Register of Deeds.
And also moves the salary increase as proposed on that to $80,686 instead of $83,351 for each, the treasurer and the clerk, changing the percentage of the treasurer's increase to match what is on the resolution, or on the resolution to 10%, and changing the Register of Deeds from 21% to 17.3%.
So this might be either my math error or it can be a clerical error that can be ignored, like Supervisor Boots was suggesting earlier. But by my math, the difference between $90,930 and $83,422 for the clerk, that's not 7%, that's 9%. Anybody else can do the math, but I did it twice and I got 9%. Okay.
And so the percentage would also change on the clerk to 9%.
Does that have to be part of the amendment?
I would, using the same rationale, I would say that is a clerical
Okay, fair enough.
change.
I'm good.
I apologize, I had to reboot my computer. Supervisor Langenhan was, Supervisor Overbeck is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But would the amounts for the future years also have to be adjusted?
They would also, yep.
Or can that be done at a later date? Or does it have to be done right now?
They need to be adjusted as part of the resolution. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Responsibility, accountability. You're going to be tired of me, but this is it's got about a $17,000 fiscal impact up for both of the positions. There's a decrease in the clerks, but again, if we start modifying the numbers arbitrarily here, we're sort of playing with where things fall within the whole classification system. And I encourage you to think carefully about that. Not to say that people don't deserve it, but we're, again, trying to look at what market conditions would drive and how it fits into our system. So I would encourage you to reject the amendment and go back to the original resolution.
Any further discussion? And I would look to either the administrator or Supervisor Marash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify, I apologize. So the clerk would be at 90,900 then? I can't read it. 90,930, correct? And then the other ones would be 80,686, correct?
Correct. And I'm waiting on confirmation that we have the other numbers and the fiscal impact before we vote on the motion. Any further discussion? Supervisor Lamont, please.
Since we have some dead air time here, I'm just clarifying, we're going to be voting on the amendment to the amendment, right?
That is correct. The amendment to the amendment is now back to the original amendment, now as being amended, puts the clerk's salary, remains the same as the original amendment at $90,930. The treasurer's salary to $80,686. The Register of Deeds at $80,686. Changes the percentages on that resolution to 9% to the clerk, 10% to the treasurer, and 17.3% to the Register of Deeds. And then it does have a fiscal impact on the out years because that also changes. And the Corp Council has that number.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the clerk, and I'm just going to read across all of the numbers so we're all on the same page. The clerk's current salary, $83,422, the initial increase being 9%. 2025 salary, $90,930. In 2026, a 3% increase to $93,658. In 2027, an increase to $96,468. And in 2028, an increase to $99,362. For the treasurer, the current salary $73,351, a 10% increase to $80,686, a 3% increase in 2026 to $83,107. In 2027, that would increase to $85,600, and in 2028 to $88,168. The Register of Deeds goes from the current salary of $68,772 to a 17.3% increase to that same $80,686 number in 2025. In 2026, similar to the treasurer, the salary is $83,107. In 2027, $85,600, and in 2028, $88,168. Then the fiscal impact would be total $153,357 over that upcoming 4-year term.
Is everybody clear what the amendment to the amendment is that we'll be voting on? Any questions? just so everybody's clear, the difference between this and the original motion as presented is $23,208. Okay, is everybody clear what we're voting on? Again, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is defeated. Now to the amendment as the original amendment, correct? So we're still back to the original amendment that was offered by Supervisor Covelli, which now reads $90,930. Again, the percentages, oops. Oh, sorry. Can you bring that back up on my screen? So again, the percentages, the clerk's increase is 9%, $90,930 as presented now. And the treasurer would go from $73,351 to $83,351. Again, that is greater than a 10% to 13% increase. And then the register of deeds would go to the same $83,351. And their 3% increase on each of the subsequent years, 26, 27, and 28. And the fiscal impact was 175,591. Is everybody clear? Supervisor Lamont, please.
I call the question, Mr. Chairman.
Any objection to question being called? Supervisor Stravinsky?
I
You're
object
objecting to
because we're
question being
already doing it.
Pardon me?
I object because we're already there.
Well,
We're about to vote.
but then you're objecting to question being called, correct?
Correct.
Is there a second to the question being called? Is there a second to the question being called? Okay. Supervisor Sawyer seconded the motion. The question being called is non-debatable, and we will have the clerk type in question being called. Okay, question's been called. A 2/3 majority vote will end debate. If passed, a less than 2/3 majority will be back at discussion. Is everybody clear what we're voting on? We're voting on ending debate. We are not voting on the amendment on the table. We're voting on ending debate. Is everyone clear? All right, we'll proceed to vote. The motion is to end debate. And we'll proceed. Oh, crap. I put in 2/3. Yep. And the motion is passed. Debate is ended. We will now vote on the amendment as presented. Yes, please. Okay. So the percentage, just so everyone's clear, the current salary for the clerk, $83,422, is increased by 9% to $90,930. And then each subsequent year is a 3% increase on that. The treasurer, the current salary is $73,351. It's a 13.6% increase to $83,351 and a 3% subsequent increase each year thereafter. And the register of deeds is a 21.2% increase to an $83,351 and a 3% subsequent increase for the remaining 3 years, with a total fiscal impact of $175,591. Is everyone clear? All right. A yes vote will approve that amendment. A no vote will not approve the amendment. We'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is defeated. Now we're back to the original motion as presented, coming from HR Finance, the original resolution. Original resolution moves the clerk from 83,422 to 93,733, a 12.4% increase. The treasurer goes from 73,351 to 76,511, a 4.3% increase. The register of deeds goes from 68,772, 11.3% increase to 76,511. And each of those salaries have a 3% increase each subsequent year, 2026, 2027, and 2028. And the total fiscal impact is on the bottom of the resolution of $130,149. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? And we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Marash. You just give me your Supervisor Longenhan. We're also.
I had to reconnect.
Got it? We've got it. We'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. We will move on to item F, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee and Health and Human Services Committee. Item F15, accept the lead and water grant program funds. Resolution 8-24. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson, second by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item F16, acceptance of the Nicotine Prevention Alliance of Central Wisconsin Nicotine Delivery Grant Program Funds. Resolution 9-24. Motion by Supervisor Vensky, second by Supervisor Zhang. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee and Environmental Resources Committee. Item G17, a budget transfer request to accept the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources surface water grant funds in the amount of $99,670 for the aerator and monitoring at the Big O Plain. Resolution 10-24. Motion by Supervisor Vensky and second by Supervisor Drabek. Any discussion? Supervisor Straub, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did you, I think the amount that you read off was different than the one that's printed in the resolution? I think you said 99,600 something.
So the original resolution had a typo in it. The 99,670 is the correct. That resolution was supposed to be swapped out. So if you possibly didn't update the packet a second time and cleared your history, it may have just loaded the same packet of information again. The 99,670 is the correct amount. Any further discussion? oops, I'm sorry, it's 99,760. So I'm a little bit dyslexic when it comes to numbers. Sorry about that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item G18, budget transfer request to accept the Nature Conservancy Challenge Grant for the amount of $10,000 for incentives to farmers in the Big Oak Plain watershed for implementation of conservation practices. Resolution 11-24. And a motion by Supervisor Vensky and seconded by Supervisor Zhang. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item G19, a budget transfer request to accept the Department of Agriculture and Consumer and Trade Protection Nutrient Management Grant in the amount of $1,350 for incentives for farmers to implement practices related to nutrient management. Resolution 12-24. And motion by Supervisor Zhang and second by Supervisor Drabek. Any further discussion? Supervisor Krause, please.
Yes, that seems like quite a low amount for me. Could you have someone speak to how that money is going to be used? Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan, please, Chair of the ERC Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Believe me, at ERC, we always love to have more money, but doesn't really work that way, unfortunately. So this comes from our packet that we were provided at our meeting this month. So we received $1,350 from the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture to implement nutrient management plans on farms. For those of you that are unfamiliar with nutrient management plans, it kind of is how it sounds. It helps farmers plan how they, dispose of the nutrients on their farm and applying things like manure on their farm. So this goes for 6 farmer stipends and 3 agronomist stipends, which would be $150 per stipend. This will allow farmers to work with county staff and agronomists to review the plan with them and discuss what's working and what's not, and then come up with new improved best management practices together. So that's where the $1,350 comes from.
And if I'm not correct, I think these are new farmers that are now adopting nutrient management plans that may not have had nutrient management plans in the past.
Sure. Even better, because we like to get engaged as soon as we can with them, and help them with their nutrient management. Kind of self-explanatory, folks, but thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Move on to item G20, a budget transfer request to accept the Good Idea mini grant in the amount of $8,000 to implement phosphorus reducing filter strips. Resolution 13-24. Motion by Supervisor Vensky and seconded by Supervisor Zhang. Any discussion on the motion? Supervisor Seibert, please.
Thank you, Chairman Gibbs. Is there a location for this $8,000 to be used, or is it just something that we're going to approve and then they'll pick and choose after they get the money, or how does that work? Or does it go into the same fund that all your wastewater plants have been paying in for phosphorus reduction?
Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That one would probably be a better question for staff, because that's really with the administration of the grant. I mean, the bookkeeping side, I don't think the ERC can really speak to.
Okay, we have Christy Heidenreich on. So Christy, if you would, please. Staff from CPC.
Sure, I'm happy. Yes, I am more than happy to address that. There is a specific location picked out to use this specific grant. There will be 3 different trial plots. We already have a landowner on the west side of the county. He is a partner with Short Lane Agronomy, and he has offered to host trial plots on his land with 3 different kinds of phosphorus reducing strips. One will be for pollinators. So, lots of flowers, very aesthetic and attractive looking. One will be more for wildlife, and then one will be a harvestable buffer. So we do have the location, and we do have a specific budget already planned out for that amount. This particular grant and the practices are not directly tied to any type of phosphorus reductions through wastewater treatment facilities. And you may be familiar with the multi-discharge variance grant that we do get from our wastewater treatment facilities. So these two are not connected. Hopefully that addresses your question.
Thank you. Any further discussions? Okay, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee and Infrastructure Committee, item H21, budget transfer of $125,000 for the replacement of a box culvert on Highway U, Resolution R-14-24. Supervisor Lamont with a motion, Supervisor Robinson with a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on from the Infrastructure Committee, item I-22, vehicular access from Hummingbird Road, County Road R, to serve Jarvis property, extension of Swallow Lane, Resolution 15-24. Motion by Supervisor Lamont, seconded by Supervisor Wilhelm. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. We will move on to item I-23, Work Zone Awareness Week, Resolution 16-24. Motion by Supervisor Langenhan, seconded by Supervisor Van Cray. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We are down to items miscellaneous, announcements and a request to need signatures from all committees except Public Safety and EED. Email went out with campaign, a reminder that if anybody is required to file a campaign finance statement, those statements are due by the 25th. Any other announcements? Supervisor Krause, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to mention that this month is Women's History Month, and Abigail Adams, who was the husband of John Adams, who helped put together the Constitution, she wrote him a letter when he was in Philadelphia working on the Constitution to remember the ladies. And many women over that time, in particular Susan B. Anthony, helped get the women's right to vote passed, and that was in 1920. And then the Equal Rights Amendment was brought forth by Susan B. Anthony in 1848. It is still not passed, and I would urge you to contact your congressional people to get them to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Thank you.
Supervisor Lamont, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe this is my last meeting, and I just want to say it was a privilege and blessing to serve with you all, and I wish you God's blessings in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Supervisor Zhang, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have two announcements to make. Today is Happy Agriculture Day, so I want to use this opportunity to thank our farmers and our growers in our community here for what they do. And I want to echo Supervisor Lamont's comments. I know that there are some supervisors that are stepping off this board, and I want to use this opportunity to thank them for their years of service, and it's been a pleasure serving with them as well. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to pick up on that theme and thank all of those who are leaving us and going on to better places. But I want to, in particular, single out Vice Chair McEwen for his leadership and on all sorts of issues over the years. And we're first of all glad that you're here and glad that you're engaging us. And we're glad that you've made a recovery through a very tough 2 years. But personally, I want to thank you for all of your leadership guidance, temperament, and just overall leadership for the county.
Supervisor Boots, please.
John stole my thunder again, so I'd also thank Supervisor McEwen. Been on board with him for 10 years. Was NACO delegate with him. Went to a lot of different places with national things, and a lot of people don't know this, but my grandfather actually served with his dad. So it was kind of good coming in. And John, that's how old you are, John. So way to go. So thank you very much, Craig. It's been an honor.
I, too, want to express my sincere thank you to each of the supervisors who chose to not run again. Supervisor Van Cray, Supervisor Book, Supervisor Oberbeck, Supervisor Leahy, Supervisor Bushman, Supervisor Gonnering, Supervisor Vensky, Supervisor Lamont, and Supervisor Niemeyer. But I want to highlight and thank you for all of your dedicated service to the citizens of Marathon County and your constituents in particular. So thank you for that service. But I want to express my sincere thank you to the Vice Chair, Vice Chair McEwen, who's dedicated his whole life to public service, if you think about it. He started out 4 years in the Air Force, serving in the armed forces, spent the next 30 years in public safety, in law enforcement, and dedicating 30 years of public safety to the safety of the citizens of Marathon County. Served 14 years on the Rothschild board as trustee, and 16 years for this county board, in the last 6 years as the vice chair. So I want to extend my sincere thank you to him for all of his dedication and to his family. So thank you. Craig, please.
Thank you. I'm very humbled, and this is the 8th different board that I've got to serve on the county board. It's been 16 years, and each board I've learned a lot. I learned a lot from this board, and I do want to thank all the supervisors, other supervisors that are leaving and not serving any further. I do appreciate the support that I had during my difficult health issues. It meant a lot to me. It was like another family, and I really appreciate that. And like I said, I want to thank each and every one of you for your support, and I wish everyone the best, and I'm sure the board will move on just fine without me, and like I said, it'll be something that I'll never forget, each and every one of you. So thank you very much, and I want to thank my family. That's majority of them's in the back there, my daughter, granddaughter, wife, and son-in-law. So they were supportive. Missed some of the family time with them, but like I said, they encouraged me to stay involved, with community service. So thank you.
Any other announcements and or requests? If not, I'll take the famous last motion from this board. The next board will be elected April 2nd. So Supervisor Vensky with a motion, Supervisor Longenhan with a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.